All yours, Martin.
Right. So welcome to this session about the UNO platform, which I called Your Apps Everywhere, but it's more like an updated version of my original talk that I gave before, which is now more focused on putting the platform into UNO platform. So there are basically two titles to this, but my name is Martin Zikmund. I'm an open source developer contributing to UNO platform. And over the last 3 years, since I've been contributing, it became kind of my most favorite thing to do. So I want to share some excitement for this platform with you and tell you a little about it and tell you why you should care and why it could solve your cross-platform application development needs. So let me introduce the problem itself. We as the developers need to build applications to reach as many users as possible. And there are many platforms that we can target. So for example, you have Windows applications that can reach people on Windows. We have macOS applications and iOS applications running on Apple devices. There are some people using Linux, and there are also people using Android. And finally, the biggest platform of all is the web, which is completely ubiquitous. So it can run on everything from a computer to a fridge. So you ideally want to reach all of these users. But doing so is kind of hard because we have multiple platforms. Each has multiple different ways of developing applications. But there are not many approaches that can leverage some kind of shared approach that can allow you to reach all of these platforms at once. So you need multiple teams of developers, each proficient in one of those targets. You need to build everything multiple times. It costs you not only a lot of money, but also a lot of time because you need to fix bugs on multiple platforms. You need to develop every feature essentially 6 times over. So it's very inefficient and very costly. So a shared approach that would allow you to have one shared code base would be much, much better. In addition, when you want to take an existing legacy application that was running on Windows, for example, and want to bring it to these modern platforms, especially to the web, it's kind of hard to do because most of the legacy applications, especially on Windows, are written in C#, and taking them to the web means complete rewrite to JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and that's very hard to do as well. So these are like two different problems that can be both solved by one shared solution. And that solution comes from UNO platform, which is a fully cross-platform UI framework. Originally, it was developed as an internal project in a company called Inventive in Canada. They used it as a tool to build cross-platform applications. But then at one of the build conferences, actually Scott Hanselman suggested that this platform is something that could be useful for everyone. So they decided to open source it and made it available for free as an open source project on GitHub. So this solution allows you to write fully cross-platform applications that allow you to reach all the platforms that I mentioned. We're using one single code base that just compiles and runs on all the different targets. And the great thing is that it uses the same tools and approaches that you already know. If you're a Windows developer, then you know XAML and C#. So you just write your common code that you already know from before, and it just works on all platforms without you having to understand any platform-specific approaches that you need for example, macOS or the web. And it's all based on .NET. So if .NET brings support for some new future platform, then we are able to bring UNO platform there as well. UNO platform itself is a platform, so it has a thriving third-party and also first-party ecosystem, which is something that I will show you throughout this talk as well. So this is a very nice solution that would solve both the problems that I mentioned before. And I will now explain briefly how it achieved this. The trick that Uno platform uses is that its API surface is exactly the same as the API surface of WinUI, which is the Windows UI library provided by Microsoft. On this slide, you can see on the left side, there are some types that you can find in WinUI. And on the right side are the same types in Uno platform. You can see it's the same type name in the same namespace. So you, as a developer, take your code base that you have written with all the bells and whistles like methods, properties, events, and so on, and compile it against Windows APIs for Windows. And then you compile it for all the other platforms using Uno platform, which provides the same functionality, the same layer as WinUI on Windows. And as a result, the application runs everywhere, including Android, iOS, macOS, WebAssembly, and Linux. As for the UI itself, Uno platform uses a mixed approach where it uses some native parts of the UI. For example, like inputs are using native input capabilities, so you get all the support for things like credential stores, like password stores, and also copy paste and these things that are native to every specific platform. But it also uses canvas rendering. So it renders the UI completely manually. So it means that you have complete control of every single pixel of your application, and you can customize everything. So if you don't like how buttons look by default, you can completely retemplate and restyle those buttons so that they look like your company branding buttons. So that's a nice thing, that you have complete control over the look of your application while getting advantage of some native parts of the UI, like the inputs and these default things that you want to behave the same as on the native platform. So without further ado, let's actually see how Uno platform works in action. So I will close the slides for now, and let's go first to playground.platform.uno, which is a website. I actually will post this if I can post it. I'm not sure if I can post here. I'm not very familiar with Zoom that much, so it might be a challenge. Yeah, chat. So here we go. So I posted that in the chat. This website allows you to try out Uno platform without ever having to install anything on your computer. So it's a fully web-based solution that has a code editor on the left side and a visualizer on the right side. So any change that you do to this left side, like adding a button here, will immediately be shown on the right side. So you can see here a button that I can click, and it says hello, as I just written hello here. So you can play with Uno platform right in the browser. You can actually do advanced things like data binding. So here is a items control, which is data bound to a property called tips. And you can provide the data here in this data tab. If I add a new item and say, hello, Cambridge, it will now say hello Cambridge under tips. So it's it's possible to provide your JSON data and then play with them and display them as part of the visualization of the XAML. And because this is a very simple example, you can also reach for some more complex things here. In the list, you can find things like animation, which shows you some rotation animation with gradient brush. There is also a thing like combo box, which is like a data picker where you select a font and it will change the text to use that font. And there are many other things like a list view, which shows a list of items. And also maybe one interesting one is tree view, which also shows a tree view hierarchy of items that you can then select parts of the tree and these things. So this is a very simple way to play with Uno platform without ever having to install anything. And if you like it, then you can proceed to actually install it into Visual Studio. All right, so I will close the browser for now, and then let's go to actually start Visual Studio and build our first Hello World application using Uno. So here I will actually start without using code first, so I can show you how to install the Uno platform extension. You can do it in Extensions menu and Manage Extensions. And when it loads, you can search for Uno platform. And here you will get the Uno platform solution templates, which is the plugin that contains not only the solution templates, but also some additional like compile time helpers that makes your life building Uno platform easier. But the most important part is the solution templates, and you can find them then in the new project dialog. When you filter by Uno platform in this dropdown, you will get 4 different templates. So I will quickly tell you what these are. So first off, there is Uno platform library, which allows library authors to build cross-platform NuGet packages, basically. So if you have some kind of UI that you want to reuse across multiple projects, or you have some helpers or services that you want to reuse, this is a great place to use it. Then there is cross-platform UI tests, which allows you to test your application's UI in a cross-platform manner. So using this template, you can build Android, iOS, and WebAssembly UI tests that can run as part of your CI, and make sure that when you make some changes, then these changes are not breaking or regressing your application. And finally, there are 2 different templates called Uno Platform App. And to explain the difference between these 2, this bottom one, this Xamarin UWP template, is an older version of Uno Platform application template. And it uses UWP, which is Universal Windows Platform, as the Windows application. And it also uses the classic Xamarin-based projects, like Xamarin Android, Xamarin iOS, Xamarin macOS, and so on. This is an older template, which will be superseded by this Uno Platform App template, which is based on .NET 6 and uses the Windows App SDK, which is the modern way to build Windows applications. But as of today, currently, if you have a stable version of Visual Studio, it's still only possible to build using this older template. And the reason is that Microsoft's MAUI infrastructure that's used for building .NET 6 applications for mobile is not yet stable in Visual Studio. Even though MAUI is officially stable, its infrastructure in Visual Studio is still kind of unstable. So the only way to build modern .NET 6 mobile applications is with Visual Studio Preview. And Uno Platform uses the same infrastructure as MAUI. So if you want to build modern applications using Uno Platform, using this new template, then you have to use the Visual Studio Preview still. Actually, when Visual Studio 17.3 is stable, then you will be able to use this template in stable versions of Visual Studio as well. So for now, this template is a better starter, but in a few weeks, hopefully, this template will be the new default and will be the recommended way to build applications. All right, so let's actually start and create one application here. I will use the old template because I'm using Visual Studio Stable. And I will call this Hello Cambridge. And I will create this project now. It will take some time because there is a lot of projects being created as part of the solution. As I mentioned, we support multiple different targets. So each target platform will have its own project here. So I'll just make this smaller so it's more clear. So here in Solution Explorer, there is a shared project, which is the one that contains your application's code, and that's the place where you will spend most of your time. You as a developer will basically code everything inside of this shared project. There is nothing special there, but this whole shared project is then cross-compiled across all the other targets. So the code that you write here will run on Android, will run on Windows, on iOS, and all the other platforms. And if I open it here in this platforms folder, there is one platform-specific project for each target. So there's Android, iOS, macOS, GTK, which is for Linux. There is Tizen, which is kind of an experimental head. There is WPF, which is for older versions of Windows. So you can build Windows 7 and Windows XP applications. There is UWP, which is for Windows 10 and Windows 11. And finally, WebAssembly, which is for the web. So let me actually select the Windows project, and I will start it here on this local machine. And when it starts, you will see that it's a very basic Hello World application. So here we go. It says Hello World, so nothing too fancy here. And I will actually open it side by side with Visual Studio so we can do some live editing. So let me select the main page, which is the main page of the application. And on that page, I will start doing hot reload. So basically changing the XAML code while the application is still running. So I will set this to be stack panel, which is a stack-based vertically oriented panel. I will add some padding so it's a little bit nicer. And now instead of the text block, I will put a slider, which I will call slider. So this is a slidable UI that actually allows you to select a value from the range of 0 to 100. And below it, I will put a text block, which will have its text data bound to that slider. So I will say binding element name slider and path of value. So now that text block will display the value that's currently selected on the slider. I'll just make the text a little bit bigger by setting font size to something like 60. And you can see that when I'm sliding the slider, the value is immediately changing and displaying the current value there. So that's just a basic functionality of data binding as part of XAML. And this is if you have used before Silverlight or Xamarin Forms or WPF or UWP, you actually know this because this is classic XAML, which allows for data binding. And it just contains all the basic controls and so on. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that in this drop-down on the top, you should select always the UWP head, because when you do this, you will immediately get IntelliSense support. So if I do something like button here, you can see it that IntelliSense is now suggesting things that I can select. So there's a drop-down button, hyperlink button, and so on. I haven't used that before. I've had selected the Android project, and in that case, I don't get any IntelliSense because it's not built in Visual Studio currently. So it's always important to select UWP. I will just add the button here saying hello. So it's some additional UI. And I will also add radio button, which is like a selection of choices. So choice 1, choice 2. So there's like multi-select capability and button and so on. It's very basic UI. And there's nothing special here actually. This is a classic Windows application, which you know from everywhere. So there's nothing fancy and interesting here. What's going to be more interesting when I now start to build this same project for other platforms. And before I do that, I will actually have to restart Visual Studio, because in the latest update, Microsoft has broken something and it does not load the Android emulators immediately. So you have to restart Visual Studio for it to work. Hopefully that's going to be fixed in the next update, but for now it's kind of annoying. So when you select now the Android project and set it as startup project, we should see the emulators showing up here in the moment. Yeah, this is just login. And yeah, here we go. So there is emulator, and I will just start the same application, but now on Android. So I will let it build. And in the meantime, I will show you that in that Android project, there is nothing fancy. There's just a main page, main class of the application that's starting up the whole application. And there is also main activity, which is starting the Windows UI XAML application activity. And this is something that comes from UNO platform. So it basically bootstraps the whole UNO platform application. Well, basically, you as a developer, you shouldn't have to touch these platform-specific projects at all, except for setting your own icons in that resources folder. But apart from it, you as a developer will spend most of your time, ideally 100% of time, in the shared project. So I will let it build. And if everything goes smoothly, I should be able to see the same UI, but now running on Android. So it's now deploying. And we should see that UI coming up very soon. Android builds are very slow, so you have to bear with them. So let's see. And we should see the exact same UI. So there is the slider. When we select the value, it will change immediately in the text block. And there is the button. And there are the multiple choice radio buttons also. So now the application is running the same way on Android. And you can even expect things like relayouting. So when I rotate this display, it will automatically change the size and relay out the controls so they fit on the page. So it's very cool. And also, it's one of my favorite things. When I switch the emulator to dark theme, the application will immediately also switch to dark theme. And all the controls in UNO platform has support for dark theme automatically included. So you as a developer don't have to do anything. You just make your application UI and it will run both in light theme and dark theme automatically without having to do any changes manually. And it will also react automatically to the OS theme. So when the user switches theme, it will automatically switch the application as well. And this works across all the platforms. So even on iOS or macOS, the same thing happens there as well. I will actually skip iOS and macOS because I don't have a Mac here. But if you have a Mac, you can then deploy the iOS application to the Mac and run it on the simulator. And if you want to test the macOS application, then you have to take your project and run it on macOS under Visual Studio on the Mac or on Rider, of course. But you cannot easily debug macOS applications on Windows because there is no way to run them here. So it's definitely needed to have a Mac. Let's go to this target, which is GTK. And this target allows you to build Linux applications. So you can take this compiled application and then run it under Ubuntu or any other Linux distribution. And actually, if you have WSL installed, you can run it under Ubuntu on Windows. So under Windows subsystem for Linux. But you can see the same UI here. when I change the value, it's changing. There's a button, there is the radio button, and it works the same way as we just saw on Windows. So this is Linux example. And now let's switch to, actually WPF is very similar. It's also rendered using C#, and it's running on older versions of Windows. So that's supporting Windows 7 and Windows XP. So when it starts, we should be able to see the same UI again, just running in a WPF application. So let's see. Yeah, so the same application on Windows 7. Again, the same UI, the same functionality. And so for the modern versions of Windows, that you have UWP, which we have already seen. And finally, there is WebAssembly. So this is kind of the most interesting target that UNO platform supports, because it allows .NET developers to finally build applications for the web. Because before we had to learn JavaScript or CSS or HTML, or most likely all of them, to actually build web applications. But now it's possible quite easily using UNO platform. So you can see that here's the same UI that we just saw on Windows, but running on the web. And it's actually running all on the client. So there is no network communication going on. It's all running as part of the browser. And it's actually .NET running in the browser. So if I go to developer tools and go to network and actually refresh the page, you can see it loads all the familiar things like system IO and system runtime, system diagnostics, and so on. It loads all of these classic .NET libraries into the browser, and then it's all running locally on the client. So there is no need for a server just for the initial load, but then you can all run the application locally without any changes. So this is the WebAssembly version. And of course, it's rendered all using HTML. So if I go here, you can see it's all divs and the classic HTML elements. And the advantage of this is that if you want to introduce some accessibility, like support for screen readers, then it's going to work as you expect, because it's based on HTML elements. So you can add all these area attributes and so on. So accessibility is quite easy because it's just HTML and no other bells and whistles. All right. So that's from a basic example of how UNO platform works. And let's go back to the slides and continue with some more advanced things. So from the UI, UNO platform supports a lot of things. It's all of those basic controls that you know from Windows, but also a lot of advanced controls like navigation view, tree view, tab view. There is pager, there is support for hierarchy in navigation, there is info bar, and a lot of these things that actually come from Microsoft. And when I say that it comes from Microsoft, it's not an understatement. It's actually the fact that we reuse their code. Here an example of date picker, but for all of those controls that I mentioned, we actually have the same source code as Microsoft. The reason is that they open source their WinUI library on GitHub, and we have the same API as I mentioned, the same infrastructure below XAML as Microsoft. So we can then take their source code, translate it from C++ to C#, and then just use the same controls as part of our code base. So here, example, date picker, very complex control because it needs to support all of those special calendar rules of multiple different countries. So you can see it's 11,000 lines of C++ code. We took it, translated it into C#, and then published it under UNO platform so that everyone can use calendar or date picker in their applications in a fully cross-platform manner. And the cool thing is that we can also port their unit tests. So when Microsoft has some runtime tests that they run against the controls, we can take them, copy paste them because they are already in C# and just run them as part of our CI. So it means we have full testing support and we know that nothing regresses between releases of Uno platform. And the nice thing is that we can also help Microsoft because as we are running on more platforms than Windows, we can actually find more bugs than they find. So it's been several times where we found some bugs that only happened on some of our targets, and then we could actually contribute back to Microsoft and fix those bugs as part of their source code. So it's a very nice, mutually beneficial relationship. And finally, if you're actually interested in how some things work in Windows, for example, focus management, which is like how when you use your keyboard and press Tab and Shift Tab, and it selects various controls as part of your UI. This functionality also is coming fully from Microsoft, and it's actually something which is not yet open source as part of Windows UI library. So if you want to know how the internals of Windows work, even though the source is closed, we have open sourced that part because Microsoft allowed us to port that code to C#. So if you go to Uno platform source code, you can find all the parts of focus management there, and you can see how navigation using Tab and Shift Tab and arrow keys in UI works, which is kind of cool. And it's the only place where you can find this fully open source version of Windows. So that's from the controls themselves. And now for theming, as I mentioned, you are in full control of how your application looks. And we support 3 different styles of controls by default. So the default one, the one that we have seen is Fluent, which is the Windows 11 based UI. But we also support Android Material and Cupertino iOS. So you can make your application look as an Android application and make it run everywhere. Or you can make your application look like an iOS application and make it look like iOS everywhere. It's up to you, and you can completely customize the look and feel of your application. And of course, any UI is more alive with animations. So Uno platform supports animations as well and transitions. So you can see that you can make very nice, even Lottie-based animations and animate between pages and so on. Finally, from the additional features, we support accessibility, as I mentioned, across platforms. So you put your accessibility attributes into XAML, and they are then rendered across all the platforms, including the web, macOS, iOS, Android, and so on. There are visual states and state triggers. So you can make your application respond to the size of the screen. So you can make it look nice on a small screen like a phone device, or even a big screen like a TV. We have full support for localization, so your application can be localized into multiple languages. And finally, we have support for conditional XAML and conditional code. So if you have some existing controls that run only on Android, for example, you can completely finally use them in Uno platform application. You just put that control in your page and make it run conditionally only on Android or only on iOS and so on. So there is nothing stopping you from using platform-specific code in Uno platform as well. And I've been talking a lot about UI, but Uno platform is not only about UI, it's also about non-UI features. So things like speech recognition, launching URIs, media player, also Geolocator, or application data for user preferences. All of these APIs come directly from Windows. They have the same API surface, and you can use them in a cross-platform manner across all the supported targets. So let's now see some examples. I'll go to gallery.platform.uno. again, type it here. So you can open it on your local device. And actually, this is a web application, which is also available as a native mobile application for Android and iOS. So you can download it from Google Play Store or from App Store on iOS. And this application shows you the free themes that we support. So material design, Fluent styles, and Cupertino styles. And you can see how different controls from Uno platform look under these free themes. So if I select button, you can see how Cupertino buttons look, how Fluent buttons look, and how material buttons look. And you can also see all the other consoles like combo box for selecting items. And let's see some example, like a radio button is interesting. So again, how they look on iOS, on Fluent, and on Android. And each of those themes has its own look and feel. So it's completely up to you how you customize it. And if you don't like any of those three, you can build your own by retemplating and restyling all the controls. It's completely in your hands and you can do whatever you need. Actually, when you click this button here, you can also see like source code example of that specific part of XAML. So you can see how the UI was built using this code preview button. Right. So that's from this part. I actually have one more thing to show you, which is Acrylic. It's a very funny and useful brush, which allows you to blur the background of a control. So if you have a panel, you can blur the background of it and make it look like a frosted kind of glass effect. And this effect is available on macOS as well. And on macOS, you can actually blur the background of the window. So in that case, you can have a partially see-through window, which is something that you commonly see on macOS. So it makes your application more part of the OS. Right, so that's from the UI part of things. And I will also now open cut.lid/APIs again. It's cut/APIs. And on this website, you can try out the non-UI features of Uno platform. So for example, let me open developer tools here. So for example, there is network information API. And this API tells you if you're connected or not. So if I click on this button, you can see I'm currently connected. And I can also click observe connectivity to check for connectivity changes. And when I now change the connectivity from being connected to simulating offline, you can see that this image immediately changed to show that I'm offline. And this is all thanks to the Network Information API, which works across all the platforms. And it gives you access to a simple C# event that is triggered automatically when any connectivity changes occur. So you as a developer can provide the user with information when connectivity changes and let the user know that they cannot, for example, contact the API or save changes to the cloud. So this is very important, especially for connected applications. I'll switch back to online. I will go to Geolocator here. This API shows you the current GPS position. So you can see that this is my latitude and longitude. There is Accelerometer API. Again, if you open this website on your phone, you can try it out. I'm currently running on a desktop PC, so it's not going to give me any results. But if you have a mobile device, you can observe accelerometer events and then move that device to see the values changing in real time. There's Clipboard for copy pasting things. There is vibration. It's quite fun if you have a mobile device. When you click this button, you will feel your mobile phone will vibrate. there is speech recognizer, which is kind of a preview thing now because it's not really supported in all browsers, and it sometimes fails. But let's try if it works today. So, hello world. All right, so it works. So, speech recognizer allows you to transcript your speech into text. And again, it runs across all the platforms. So Android, iOS, macOS, and WebAssembly. There is one of my favorite examples is Midi, which is musical instrument device interface. And this API is available across all the platforms and allows you to communicate with an external device that's a digital piano or digital guitar, for example, and then play notes on that device. And actually, I have a digital piano behind me there, you can see, and I will show you how it works. I connected my tablet to that digital piano and selected that digital piano in the list that shows up. And now I can play notes from the tablet on that piano. So let's see. So that's actually a browser communicating with a USB device that's connected to it and sending notes from C# through JavaScript MIDI API to that MIDI device and playing them on that device, which is kind of crazy and fun. And it goes both ways. So if you play something on that piano, you can then see those notes showing up in the browser. So it's very fun and enjoyable experience. And it's fully cross-platform again. So it's available on Android, iOS, macOS, and WebAssembly. On all of those targets, you can use the same API to do the same thing without any platform specifics, of course. So that's Midi. 2 weeks ago, we added Gamepad Support. So if you connect your Xbox controller to the device, be it Android, iOS, or the web, you can see the gamepad readings in the application, and you can then see which buttons are being pressed and how firmly are you pressing on the triggers and so on. And there is also file system, which is kind of one fun one, which allows you to pick a folder on your device. So pick the pictures folder here. And when I add permission for the website to access my file system, it will actually list all the contents of that folder. So you can see there's a lot of files there. And I can prove that that's actually there. You can see all those files are showing up here. And I can also create specific files. So I can do hello Cambridge and save changes so that the browser can write to my local file system. So now the file has been added. You can see it here at the end, hello Cambridge. And I can actually write to that file. So I say, hello world, and write to file. So now the browser has written the content into that text file. If I open it, you can see hello world in that text file showing up. So that's very cool functionality, which allows you to actually communicate with local file system of the device on which the website is running on. And that's super useful for like company internal systems which are working with actual files, and you want them to edit text files or save text files and so on. So this is a very powerful functionality. And again, it's cross-platform. So you can use that same thing on iOS, on macOS, or on Android. And it just works. So that's from the non-UI APIs. And let's go back to the slides. And now let's talk finally about putting the platform in Uno platform. Because a framework or UI library cannot stand on its own, of course. It has to be an actual platform which has more support behind it. So Uno platform itself provides many first-party extensions and additions. So one of them is support for Visual Studio Code, which is currently not very supported in case of Windows development and actual Microsoft development. But Uno platform now supports XAML and C# code completion and XAML hot reload right in Visual Studio Code. So you can write your code, make changes while the application is running, and see those changes showing up in the browser that's running that application. And it gives you full IntelliSense. So even in XAML, you get IntelliSense for attributes, for events, and for all these things that you expect in XAML. So you can see that animation that's showing some of those features running on the right side. Yeah, I forgot to mention it also supports C# hot reload. So you can actually change C# code, and those changes will also show up in WebAssembly application. Right. So let's go forward. Here we have a new library called Uno Extensions, which is, again, a new first-party offering, which makes building your applications much easier. It contains a lot of different components that you can use to fast bootstrap your application and build up your application from some smaller building blocks. You can see it as a kind of a Lego system where you take some pre-built parts of application and put it together to get something working very fast. And it contains things like configuration, logging, dependency injection, and so on. And one of my favorites is navigation, which allows you to much easier build navigation throughout your application. So navigating from one page to another, showing dialogues and these things. So it's nothing that you have to use. It's something that makes your life easier as a developer. And it's completely optional. So it's a separate library from Uno platform, but it's very useful to know about it and to try it because it makes your life much easier. Right. And one of also new offerings is Uno Ui Toolkit, which contains some additional UI elements that you can use in your application. For example, navigation bar or TabBar, because these controls are not yet available in Windows. So we created these UI controls ourselves so that we can surface them for all the targets. And in the future, if Microsoft adds support for tab view, for example, then we can also fall back to their implementation instead of our custom one. But for now, if you need a tab bar, then Uno UI Toolkit is the way to go. Right. So this was all first-party offerings, but having a platform means that you need also third-party support. And Uno platform is shining here because it supports any .NET standard 2 library. So anything that you already use in your applications, you can use in Uno platform as well. To point out there is Microsoft Community Toolkit, which contains things like MVVM support or some additional controls. So all of that is supported and you can use it in Uno platform as well. There are also many third-party controls for charting, from Infragistics or Syncfusion. I have some examples of that afterwards. And there are also presentation frameworks support. So things like Reactive UI or Prism or the Community Toolkit MVVM, all of those are supported as well. So here's some example of the charting components. Again, completely cross-platform. So if you want to use them on Android or iOS, they will work there as well. And here's Syncfusion example. So again, charting components, which you might know from Syncfusion Toolkit for Windows or Android and other platforms. So that's this one. And finally, we have also now support for Figma. And Figma is a kind of interesting thing because it allows developers and designers to cooperate and communicate much more easily. And Uno Platform is the first XAML framework which allows you to completely design your application in Figma and then export that resulting design to XAML and use it in your application directly. So it consists of two components. First one is a library of UI controls that you know from Uno Platforms, so buttons, radio buttons, combo boxes, and so on. And there is Live Preview plugin that can then take that design that you created in Figma and convert it into XAML. So as a result, you get XAML code that you can then put into your Uno Platform application and make it just work without having to write the code yourselves. And it also allows you to use the designers who are skilled at building and designing UIs, and you can focus on the code itself. So which is kind of beneficial and is something I would really need. So I will show you this thing in live demo as well. So if I click on Figma, I will ignore update, of course, and it closed Figma, great. So let's try again. Oh, good, it's running. So when it loads, I have this example application built in Figma. I'm not really skilled at Figma, so I will just show the basics. But if you have a designer, he can use all the skills that he learned from, they can use all the skills that they learned from Figma design and apply them and just build UI for Uno Platform. So here we have a sample application with different screens. It's like a simple commerce application for building like shopping application, basically. And I will select this first page here. This is a login screen. And I have installed the Uno Platform plugin here. So if I select it, it will now load a WebAssembly application as part of Figma. And on this preview page, I will now be able to see the login page as rendered in WebAssembly. So if I click refresh, it will show the login page where I can type my email, my password, and then try login. So you can basically have a live preview of that UI in WebAssembly. And I can actually change the UI as well. So if I click on the email here and select the type to change the type to be outlined, you can see that the design has changed a little bit to match the outlined material design. And if I refresh, you can see that the change has now been promoted into this WebAssembly preview as well. So I can type email, password, again, interactively see that UI. And finally, when I'm satisfied with that UI, I can go to this XAML tab to see the full XAML of that design. So I can take this and copy paste it into my Visual Studio and then just use it without having to make any changes. And all of this will work in a Uno Platform application out of the box. So that's pretty nice. There's other things that you can use, like providing some data, again, using JSON, and also there are themes that you can customize the colors of the application and so on. So all of this is part of the Uno Figma plugin. Right, so let me go back to slides, and I will tell you one more thing about like the sustainability of Uno Platform, because it's an open source project and it's often source of confusion because people are not sure if it's something that will stay here and will stay supported. So to kind of prove that is that Uno Platform already has hundreds of customers, because the company that created Uno Platform is building client applications in Uno Platform as well. So there's a lot of applications that are already in the store built using Uno Platform. And there are also bigger clients that are actually using UNO platform priority support to get their feedback and their issues and their requested features implemented faster. So one of them is TradeZero, which is a trading company which has mobile-based solution, which they want to take to web in the future as well. And it's a very detailed chart-based UI, which is focused on efficiency and productivity. And again, works very well across all supported targets. There's also Kawa, which has taken their huge construction project planning software and taken it from the web, from WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, to the web. So it's now all running in the browser, including advanced features like file pickers, or they use tree views, they use many other things that UNO platform supports. And they actually now have their first WebAssembly preview running on top of .NET 7. So it's really cutting edge software, and it's using UNO platform to the fullest. And it really shows that the performance, even on the web, is really good. So finally, one more example that I want to show you, two more examples actually. One of them is Calculator, that you can find on calculator.platform.uno, and on Apple App Store and Google Play Store, of course. So this is actually a port of the Windows Calculator, which is part of Windows, that you can find on Windows Calculator. So this is the same application, even though it's using the older version of the design. So this is the Windows 10 design, not the Windows 11 one. But it has all the features like scientific keyboard or programmer keyboard, so conversions between different numeric bases to binary and so on. It has also a conversion of volumes and lengths and weights. So 500 kilos is 0.12 elephants and so on. So we can play with this. And for iPad specifically, it's probably the best free calculator application that you can get. So it's worth trying and actually using, especially on iOS. So that's Calculator. And one more example, more geared towards developers, is NuGet, which is something that we probably all know. It's the package manager for .NET. If I search for a package like JSON, you can see that on the right side, there is now a button called Open in NuGet Package Explorer. So if I click on this, it loads a WebAssembly UNO platform application, which takes the package, unzips the package, and shows the contents of that package right in the browser. So on the left side, you can see some metadata about that package and its dependencies across different targets. And on the right side, there is a tree view which shows things like image files from that package, README with full preview. And you can also see like DLLs. And in those DLLs, you can then see things like assembly attributes, PDB info, and metadata references, and so on. So this is a great way to actually preview NuGet packages or to understand how they are built up, because it not only allows you to open NuGet packages from nuget.org, but also from your local file system. If you press open, you can open some local NuGet package. I don't have one here, but if you have some NuGet package, you can let it analyze and see the contents of it and just quickly preview what's there. So that's kind of a more advanced application running in UNO platform WebAssembly, but UNO platform really runs everywhere. And here is a proof of that. So this is UNO platform calculator running in a Tesla browser. And actually, Tesla browser is now kind of advanced in terms of HTML5 and JavaScript support. So you can actually build full-fledged WebAssembly applications using things like GPS, and all these sensors right in Tesla browser. And that's great because because Tesla has a closed ecosystem. So the only way to actually build applications for it is through the browser. So this allows you to bring .NET applications to Tesla. So that's basically the end of my session, but I have a few more things to tell you. First, if you want to see how everything works or get some tutorials on how to get started, Uno Docs is a great way, a great place to go. I will actually write it here again. So docs platform.uno. So we have completely rewritten the documentation recently, so it should now contain everything and fully up to date. And if something is missing, please let us know. And for the way to how to get started, again, first go to platform.uno to do documentation to see what's there. And if you hit any roadblocks or if you have any feedback, you can talk to us on Discord. We have people who are online all the time because there are many developers in Canada. We have some people in Europe, including me, and also there is a developer in Australia. So all the time zones are covered. And if you have any issues or want to contribute, you can go to GitHub and file issues or send PRs as you see fit. So that's it from my session. And if you have any questions or feedback, I'm happy to answer.
Feel free to add a question in the chat or just speak if you want to. You?
Yeah, really impressive session. I had used the NuGet Explorer. Hadn't really clocked it was Uno, but yeah, I've used that pretty extensively. Really impressive demo. I must admit, I was pretty blown away by that. I was aware of it, but maybe not of all its capabilities, and I'm struggling to see any downsides, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that's very good, of course. I mean, of course, we still have a lot of things to do, like we want to add more features from Windows, like port new controls and port existing things. Like recently we have ported the slider control from Windows directly. So all the features like keyboard input and these things should now work the same way as on Windows. But there are many things that we don't have, like the internal sources of yet. So in the future, it will keep evolving in sync with Windows and all the new features. So of course, that's our goal, to make your life as a developer as easy as possible.
I have the obvious question here. Yeah, I'm also very impressed by the platform. Basically, it's targeting everything. So my question is, so maybe two questions. So why do you think Microsoft created an MAUI instead of like collaborating more closely with the Uno platform? And second is, how do I decide if you want to go with an MAUI and Uno platform, other than obviously they're massively targeting, you know, that you have, that Uno platform has? Yeah.
So first thing, the reason why Microsoft has built MAUI instead of like replacing Xamarin Forms with Uno platform is, of course, that it's their own internal thing. They want to evolve Xamarin. They wanted to evolve Xamarin Forms and, you know, take the existing developer base to a modern version of Xamarin Forms. So that's MAUI basically. The Windows team is collaborating with us quite closely, and the good thing is that while they are not planning to build any cross-platform versions of WinUI currently, they say that the way to go is Uno platform because it's the same API surface. So if you are familiar with building Windows applications, it's probably easier for you to build Uno platform-based application than to build MAUI application, because the XAML and the approach to rendering things and, you know, like the the way of thinking is kind of different for Xamarin Forms, because that's based more on Android and iOS and their approach. So things like renderers are there, where you have to provide like platform-specific renderers for controls that you want to fully customize. And the UI itself, by default, looks like a native Android or native iOS application. So Uno platform is more based on Windows and more in line with what you know from Windows. So I think that's probably the biggest advantage that there is for Windows developers, and also, of course, supporting more targets. So including the web, which is something you cannot reach with MAUI, and Linux, of course. Yeah. Yeah. There is also a question from chat. I see. So which one is winning cross-platform battle for LOB applications? If it's Uno, MAUI, or Avalonia, or something else? Hard to say. I think all of these three mentioned are like pushing each other in terms of like performance, because we want to improve performance across the board, with .NET being underneath all these three platforms. So each version of .NET is improving performance for all of them, but also each platform is making some performance improvements on its own and pushing each other. When one is improving, then the others are improving as well. And I personally have tried only MAUI. I haven't tried Avalonia, so I cannot really compare in terms of functionality. But I think it's always up to the developer to pick what suits their needs most. And having competition in C# and XAML space is of course good, because it means that we will not rest and not evolve, because we have no competition, which would be bad, of course.
Another question is, I'm aware that there is, you mentioned, I don't know if it's the community toolkit allows you to create UI using C# rather than XAML. Is that something that you can do with the Uno platform, or not yet?
There is a C#, like
instead of using XAML, you can use C# to build.
Yeah,
the
like
UI.
yeah, you can definitely build the whole UI in C#. That's possible. There is a library that makes this easier, like code UI in C# or something. Not sure that
Some
right
fluent, yeah, some fluent.
Yeah,
I
so
remember the name.
I think that library has a Uno platform port or support somehow. And of course, in the future, because Microsoft is planning to add proper code in UI in code support to WinUI, we will also add it, because it's going to be the same API, and we will be able to take advantage of their changes in Uno platform as well.
Nice. Any other questions? No? So thank you, Martin. Really appreciated your talk. So I will upload this to YouTube at some point in the next few days. So thank you very much for taking your time and sharing with us the platform.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thank you. See you, everyone.
Fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks.
Bye-bye.